I want to learn about Latin. I want to learn about vowels. Well, I is not actually a pure vowel. I is a diphthong. And in Latin, it's written like this, I, to show that it's a diphthong. It's a gliding of the tongue. Now, in English, we have this sound, I, and we think of it as a vowel. I. Not actually a pure vowel, a diphthong. Now, you can take a look at the letter here. And this letter, we call it I. In its supposed long form, I, it's told to children that it's a vowel. But it's actually a diphthong in that supposed long form, I. Now, in Old English, it's of course E in the long form, but it became I because of the English vowel shift, and it changed to I because of what happened to some of the other letters. But you can't sustain I, so it's not a pure vowel. And by sustaining, I mean trying to make a sustained sound. I, you can't sustain it. But you can sustain E. That means it's a pure vowel. But be aware of the fact that I is actually a sound in Latin. But this letter here, this letter is actually a semivowel. It can be a consonant sometimes. Now, we're not going to get into the consonant form of E today, but semivowels shall be spoken about in the next video. Now, for one thing, what you need to do is forget about what you were told about vowels when you were in school. I mean, most of it is really crap. Really, what you've been told is mostly a load of junk. Diphthongs are a part of English, and they're everywhere, and they're part of Latin too. Now, if you really want to know where that word comes from, diphthongs, it means gliding of the tongue. Now, when we get into this, you may see some contradictory information from what you're reading in Latin books or what you're being told by your Latin teacher. But this is actually what, or the closest that we can get to, what the Romans actually spoke, what they thought, the sounds that came to their lips, what they heard. And this is fascinating research. This is cool stuff. This is what the actual Roman language sounded like. We're as close as we can get to it. If we actually dissect it and really get into it and disregard the supposed classical pronunciation in some certain circumstances. So let's take a look at a book. Here is Bennett's New Latin Grammar. And it's actually a pretty good book for grammar. But for pronunciation, it's not so good. Well, it's typical classical pronunciation. But the problem with the classical pronunciation is the diphthongs. Now let's take a look here. It's not I, it's a. That's wrong. This is wrong too. It's not that sound. It's not oi. Now here's something that's not a diphthong at all. That's not a diphthong at all either. So let's take a look at a few things. Now, like I said, this is a good book for grammar, but for pronunciation, we're going to actually get into some things. Ew and ow is what we're going to start with. So, ew and ow are two diphthongs which occurred in Latin. The top one, Europa, Europa, not Europai, Europa. Ew, ew, glide that tongue, get that e into u. Ew, Europa, Europa. Here's our first diphthong right there. Now, we're going to take a look at ow next. Now, ow is a sound that we get in English as well. Now, ow in English can come to us in two pieces of writing. The one on the left can also be oo, but we're not going to explain why. The one on the right can also be o. Now, o is not a sound that you hear in Latin. Never. In Latin, a long o is o, not o. Never glide that tongue when speaking Latin. Now, the problem is, it's a little more complicated for us because it's everywhere, and almost all of our supposed long O's are actually O. On the left, you have that semivowel W showing you that it's diphthongated. On the right, you don't, but it's also the same sound, mode. It's that O sound again. You have to get that out of your Latin. So let's talk about where the classical pronunciation really screws with you. If you really want to understand the phonetics of Latin, classical Latin for the classical period, this is the video for you. This first sound is ah. The second one is eh, eh. The first sound, ah, is found in English. Eh is not. It's a rounded front vowel, and I don't expect you to be able to master that quite yet, but at least be able to recognize these and understand what I'm talking about. We have ligatures here, where two letters are connected together. You see, the Romans had an idea of how to represent these sounds. Because they didn't have letters, they would connect letters together. We're going to talk about this a little bit more. So, this first sound, ah, this is found in English today, and it goes all the way back to Old English. Of course, English is not quite so related to Latin. You have to go back thousands and thousands of years for that. But anyways, was. That's was. And ash is still the same, like an ash tree, ash. We don't have these ligatures anymore. We don't write AE together at all anymore, but the sound is still part of modern English. Ash, ash tree. Now, if you want to take a look at what happened to Latin, you had a sound I. That diphthong collapsed, and it collapsed into a. Much like how people in the south part of America say wife instead of wife. For the Romans, it collapsed from I to a, and it was still a heavy syllable, a. And they represented this by writing the letters A and E together, connected them together to represent that sound, because they felt like it was in between ah and a, which is a fair assessment for them. And we're going to get into in other videos. That's a rounded front vowel. A rounded form of a is We'll talk about that later. So, a and ui. We're not looking at diphthongs here. Take a look here at the pronoun. First person singular. Meus, mei, male, meu, male. You're not looking at diphthongs. Take a look at this pronoun, the dative of quis. Kui, kui, kui. 2 syllables. All this information is going to help you with mastering the semivowels, which we're going to get into pretty soon. The semivowels will talk a lot about the vowels u and e. And we'll talk about how you can have this relationship between a consonant and a vowel.